Okay, so there's this guy named Thomas Malthus. He's kind of a side player in the history of science, but he had this like moment where he was a big deal. And that moment actually inspired other scientists and like, he was like a big deal before he wasn't. Um, Before the Industrial Revolution, this guy was like a population scientist, economist, biologist. Like many people in his time, also a religious. He was like a kind of like a priest or a pastor or something. And his church was focused on feeding the poor, as many churches do. And he said, we might have a problem here because whenever we have an abundance of food and we have enough to share, this tends to lead people to have more babies, which leads to more problems, which leads to more hunger. And then if we ever make any progress and can produce enough for everybody, then everybody's healthy enough. And this starts to perhaps sound really brutal. He was not actually saying that we should let people starve. Write that down. He did not say that we should allow people to starve. He's been credited with that, and that's entirely incorrect. But he talked about this thing called the Malthusian trap. The idea that, like, if we lift our environmental limits, then population will rise to that, and then we're going to go back to being miserable. He actually argued that humanity could never have true progress, and we'd always end up poor and miserable. And it was a pretty dark argument, and, like, in a lot of ways, he's kind of right. Because he was also like a religious dude, he also said that the only way to avoid global collapse was like hardcore religion. And by mixing religion and behavior and resources and the environment, everything this guy ever, like every angle is touchy. So there's a lot of misunderstandings. I'm not actually qualified to teach you about Malthusian history, but there is this notable thing that he said about population, which leads us to other study goals. He says that that there is a certain limit to how many people you can have, right? That's called carrying capacity. Not enough food, or not enough shelter, or not enough wood to build your houses, and not enough clay to make your bricks, or whatever. He says that there are these limiting factors that generate a carrying capacity for the environment. And he said that we will always flirt with that carrying capacity, and our populations will always struggle with famine, pestilence, and war. By the way, that's 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. A religious reference because the guy was a religious guy. But it's kind of a famous quote. It means hunger, disease, and conflict, conflict over resources, which actually are classic limiting factors. We're going to talk more. I've got a whole study goal about limiting factors in the reading packet, so I won't waste your time now. But maybe you understand that if there's not enough things around, well, you're likely to be hungry, you're likely to get sick because you're too many people around, and you're likely to fight with other people. So he was kind of right. And he actually did spend a lot of time in the trenches working in poor communities, trying to figure out what they needed, trying to figure out how to provide for them. And yeah, so important just so that you know that this guy existed. He introduces to our conversation limiting factors that we'll circle back to later, and that one famous quote about the 3 horsemen: famine, pestilence, and war. Okay, that's it for that one.